YouTube, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to a brand new reaction video with your boy EndSpawnShadow. We are going to react to some lore about the game Ark Raiders. This video is made by Eckhart's Ladder. I think I pronounced that correctly. This was around 2 weeks ago, and the video is titled "The Horrific Lore of Ark Raiders Explained: The Full Story." So there'll be a link down below to the original video. Go and check it out. I highly recommend it. And without anything else in the way, sit back, grab something to eat, drink, enjoy the video, share this with a friend, and let's get into today's video, shall we?
I'll admit, like many of you, I'm sure, I am one of the many who have become obsessed with Ark Raiders. Before playing, I honestly wasn't sure how much I'd enjoy the game. I haven't really been able to get into extraction shooters as a genre, but what's interesting is that not only is the gameplay great, there is some really interesting lore and world building to the universe if you know where to look. Ark Raiders is a cool mix of Fallout with its retro futuristic post-apocalyptic setting and also Horizon Zero Dawn, where you're essentially operating among the ruins of a much greater society. In today's video, we'll take a look at both the world building and the ongoing narrative of Ark Raiders, while also theorizing on the destruction of Earth and the appearance of the Arks.
That's a pretty cool intro, dude. Star Wars, Halo, and more.
Alright, so let's get to the basic premise. Ark Raiders is set in a post-apocalyptic future where mysterious robots, dubbed by humanity as Arks, rule the surface of a destroyed Earth while humans are forced underground. So far, visits to the surface of the planet seem to take place on what is almost certainly modern-day Italy, while the Raiders we play as reside in the underground city of Toledo. The underground retreat is also sometimes referred to as Speranza, with Toledo, I believe, being the name for the overall city, and Speranza the portion where the player resides. At this point, the big question is, well, what happened? The game actually leaves that fairly vague, and it's almost certain that more reveals will come as the game lives on. However, through both the in-game codex and world building through the map, we can get a decent idea of what happened, while also filling in the gaps with theories. So our first bit of confusion comes right off the bat: timeline. The introductory cutscene for the game implies that the modern Ark story begins in 2180.
Oh, 2180. Wow, that is far.
However, the website is more clear and says that 2180 was the date of what became known as the collapse. The current events of Ark Raiders take place some far time after the collapse, stated by the game to be at least generations. During the collapse, the Earth became nearly uninhabitable following massive climate change. The planet we know was ravaged by earthquakes, wildfires, flooding, as the air became polluted and the planet desolate. Now, this is going to be a confusing point, so try to pay attention because there are several near-apocalyptic events preceding the game's current story, but much of what you see when you jump into Ark Raiders on the surface would have been from this pre-collapse era. And I actually believe that this is why some of the technology is anachronistic, but I'll come back to that in a second. What we do know is that human survivors were split up into two groups: those who escaped to space on incredibly advanced rockets, and those left to survive on what at that point was a dying planet. It seems like, by the way, things were really bad. Think of something like The Road. People were surviving and having to completely alter their way of living in the harshest conditions possible, with no hope for society's return. Humanity's time in the darkness has rendered the pre-collapse technological age as one mixed in reality and myth, especially given that some of our greatest inventions went to the stars during the human exodus. However, while the end of things seemed inevitable, it did not come. Instead, humanity faced what was referred to as the Age of Sunrise. The Earth somehow began to recover from its ecological damage, and humanity began to slowly rebuild. Again, we don't know a whole lot about how humans lived during this time. It does seem, again, that most of the great cities and constructions were from before the collapse, at least the bones of them. However, it does appear like humanity was able to achieve some level of technological sophistication. The best proof of this is honestly the presence of Speranza. And again, I do believe this explains some of the weird technological disparity you see on the surface. Computers, for example, look far more basic than a level of technological sophistication implied by, say, the vehicles or structures. And I notice when your raider is underground, you can see, for example, on the journey into Speranza, those same computers are present underground. So it seems like after the collapse, humanity moved back to the surface. They rediscovered and rebuilt technology when possible, but especially in certain areas, never achieved the same level of sophistication.
All right, sorry for pausing here really quickly. It seems really interesting. Like, I'm pretty sure this is supposed to be after I said, what is 2180s? But, you know, we are forced to rebuild technology from, like, the ground up. So instead of having, like, you know, this high-tech, like, very, very extreme technology, we are, like, set centuries back for like very old computers, hence they're like, you know, they're shaped like a box from the early, like, was it 1800 to the 1900s? I don't exactly know when the TV was invented and all that. So it is really interesting that, like, it was split into group from one of them, one of us staying on the dying planet of Earth, and the other group went into space. So I wonder if the other group is going to try and return, or maybe they will come back and warn us about the orcs coming in this, like, gigantic fleet of their empire or something like that. Because I really want to know, like, who or what made the orcs and why were they sent to Earth.
Hence the, at times, anachronistic technology. Still, the structures, the cities, the major installations like dams, those are almost certainly pre-collapse. The description for the buried city, for example, lists it as evidence of how humanity lived before the collapse, and, well, the codex entry for the hydrophonic domes state that they are newer constructions. Humanity after the collapse was presumably responsible for many of the tunnels and elevators and other means of operating through the surface, and the game even alludes to new passageways being opened up. Although we also do know that many of these tunnels, known as tubes, were originally created to help the evacuation of the planet during the collapse. Okay, so we have an environmental collapse. Humans on the surface live in darkness. They barely survive. They begin rebuilding the civilization. Yep. What happens next? Well, shortly after sunrise, we get the arrival of the first wave of arcs. The source of these is unknown, though there are some good theories. But this attack was devastating. The first wave of arcs are less technologically advanced than the ones we fight throughout the game, and we can see evidence of them across the map. The first wave culminated in the Battle of Victory Ridge, where raiders assembled to fight off the remaining Arc forces, giving survivors temporary relief prior to the arrival of the second wave. The battle itself was quite devastating, and the land near it is still suffering the ecological effects. Now, this is where things continue to get a little confusing, because there's an indeterminate amount of time between the final battle of the first wave of Arc attacks and the beginning of, now, the second wave. However, we can speculate. Given the advancement in technology of Arc machines a new generation of raiders fighting the battle, it seems like there were a good 20 to 30 years between waves 1 and 2. This can also be surmised through one of the first NPCs you meet in the game, Celeste. Celeste seems to be in her late 20s or early 30s and is a survivor of the first wave, losing her home and parents to Arc attacks at an early age before adopting a nomadic lifestyle prior to the second wave. We don't know how much time humanity had on the surface before the attacks, how much of their advancement has come subsequently, but
is there a third wave coming then?
Were more unrelenting than the first, making the surface of Earth more inhospitable than it already was. Humanity at this point was again forced fully underground, occupying sunken cities and utilizing that aforementioned underground network of tubes. Celeste and a small group of others helped establish Toledo and the neighborhood of Speranza beneath the former Italian countryside in an attempt to survive overwhelming Arc forces. This brings us to where your player's story begins, as they're welcomed into a struggling and now very resource-poor underground city, taking up the role of a topside raider.
I'm sorry for pausing again. The fact that, like, you know, he's just playing as much of the story we're getting right now, the fact that just really, like, you know, pokes at the back of my head that this is barely a fraction of this, like, gigantic iceberg for the whole story of Arc Raiders is incredible, dude.
That's the basic story as it's currently known.
Yeah,
There's a lot
basic
of
story.
intrigue and possibilities for how things can continue, but let's get into theorizing. And there's a lot here. Most obviously, we have the origins of the arcs. There's a few ideas. Let's get one of the more interesting out of the way. Could the arcs have existed as a part of pre-collapse Earth and caused the collapse in order to begin a machine takeover like Skynet of the Terminator franchise? Post-collapse human technology, as we see in weapons and the underground city, is very slapped together, utilizing tech from humanity's past and what they can achieve now. One of the most advanced remnants of pre-collapse society is the humanoid android. On Speranza, we have Lance, who, like the residents, is unaware of his origins, but the spaceport map makes it clear that other models most likely existed prior to the collapse. Lance is very different from the others. You can find many destroyed or damaged models incapable of speech near the spaceport, implying they were left behind. It could be that AI became self-aware and, following years of mistreatment by their creators, decided to rebel, the androids being an early stage of evolution for what the arcs would later become. Or maybe the arcs are simply a tool of some other superintelligence. You can sort of think of the attack on the environment as sort of an inverse of the machine uprising in the Matrix. In that story, humanity darkened the skies in an attempt to block off the energy source of the machine empire. In this case, the arcs may have targeted the ecosystem intentionally, not just to destroy humanity, but maybe even to create a biome which suited them more appropriately. But if their goal simply was to destroy humanity, that would explain why the Earth seemingly miraculously recovered after some time. Another, I think, less interesting and likely example is that the arcs are extraterrestrial. Same story, they orchestrated the
That's exactly what I theorized.
The majority of humanity before starting two full-scale invasions. This one doesn't really speak to me. There's something very human about the arcs, especially when compared with other technology which still exists.
That is true.
And that's why I think the most likely theory is the final one we're going to discuss now. That arcs are being sent by the colony of humans who initially left
for
planet,
space.
The Exodus humans. This theory is a bit more involved, but I think you can find more evidence to support it. For one, those who abandoned the planet were most likely Earth's elite, the wealthy and powerful, alongside perhaps scientists and the world's greatest thinkers. Space travel and colonization of other planets was probably not a commonality prior to collapse, with the Codex even referring to those who abandoned the destruction as valorous survivors. Thematically, there's a lot more you can do here. It makes the central conflict of the game a battle between classes, the wealthy utilizing arcs to steal resources, and essentially the planet from the struggling people they left behind. It blends seamlessly with the current themes of the game as well. The city of Toledo is filled with secluded neighborhoods of poor and struggling people driven to selfishness.
How does the queen get on then? Or like the emperor or whatever?
Overabundance of some. The neighborhoods all look out for themselves but collaborate when the need exists, almost like how the players do. You can see a stranger on the surface and take what's theirs, or attempt to come together to fight a greater threat. Meanwhile, the wealthy humans live among the stars, kicking back, watching us fight, and getting ready to take back a newly pristine planet. I'll come back to that in just a second because there's also some, I guess I'll call it neutral information I noticed within the game. For one, and actually I think this does hint a bit more at humans being responsible for the arc threat. The arcs are said to currently be residing in orbit. We see pods dropping from space. They're usually crash, but they are meant to be testing something before returning to orbit, something in the planet. The arcs generally seem really interested in digging. It could be that the Exodus humans are simply testing the healthiness of Earth before returning. Or on the other hand, if the rogue AI theory is correct, maybe there's some metal or something they're looking for which they believe can further their own technology. All right, though, back to the themes of the big guy versus the little guy. We do need to talk about how Arc Raiders may tie into developer Embark Studios' previous game, The Finals. The Finals is set in 2100 within a virtual reality competition show consisting of gladiator matches with a world similar to Ready Player One. Most of humanity spends much of their time in VR, with very little known of the world outside the game show. The Finals shares these themes of class, with many large corporations running and profiting off of the Finals, satirizing corporate sponsorships alongside an ongoing plot of hacktivists known as CNS who attempt to expose those behind the games. I think it's plausible that the finals and Arc Raiders exist within the same fictional universe, but there's also a little bit of messiness here. At the beginning of the video, I said Arc Raiders is set in 2180. That is what the opening cinematic implies. However, the website itself says that in 2180, Earth fell. So by that, there's still 100 years between the events of the finals and the collapse during Arc Raiders.
That's
so
fair.
Anything could have happened. Another connection can be found on the spaceport map, featuring a sponsor featured in the finals with the Italian word for liar spray painted over it. This seems like a CNS message and does hint that the two games could exist in the same universe. It could also just be a fun Easter egg left by the devs. This, however, is only the beginning, and speculation will continue as the story develops further. Arc Raiders is very, very popular right out the gate, and seeing how Embark has proven themselves in handling an ongoing online game with the finals, it seems like Arc Raiders has only the potential to grow from here. But those are the basics and also some of my thoughts and theories. Let me know what you think down below, and I'll see you next time.
the dog out of nowhere, dude. I think that was really good, dude. I think just to wrap up this video here, some of my favorites. I think, like, personal opinion here, I generally think the whole of arcs being like outer space beings sent by something or someone to, you know, attack humans. I do want to know exactly why they're here and all that. I mean, they're trying to, you know, like, to eradicate humanity. They're digging in the ground, maybe trying to reach the Earth's core. There's just so many theories and ideas, you know, out here for this game, and it has just begun for the story, and I am super excited to see how this will go. As I said before, the original video will be a link down below. Go and check that out. And I hope you guys have an amazing rest of the week. Stay safe, take care, Merry Christmas, and I see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.